What we're going to do is go over Engenia and kind of pull the Fexapan and the Fexapan and Extendamax into this conversation, because that's what the Section 3 label was trying to do. It's trying to put those things together. Obviously, all things here are on the high view as far as the Section 3 label. The states are still working those details out as far as what they're going to do, but everybody's pretty close, first and foremost. So we're going to run through it and just kind of go on from where we left last year and where we started, because we made some significant changes to the label, just to try and keep things a little more uniform. All right. With that being said, test at the end. I hope you caught all that. There you go. So I'm going to talk about these things. These are the federal label requirements. We made some adjustments to that, again, to make it more uniform between the three herbicides. However, it's much the same. We're just trying to, do everything we need to do to keep this stuff on target and go forward. I'm going to go through each of these quickly and just define them, and then at the end we'll just kind of summarize them. So don't get too caught up in how busy this works. These label restrictions are for the federal label and pertain to the on-target application parameters. And then again, I'm going to qualify this on the states, because all states are different. And really, we tried to different people present things a little differently. The Stanley Culpeppers of the world down in Georgia, he did this with glyphosate resistance. He came over to Tennessee to the grain conference, and he's like, if you try, in 2006, and he said, we got glyphosate resistant pigweed, and he said, if you don't do this, you're done. If you don't do this, you're done. You don't do this, you're done. And by being done is you're out of business. Right? And it may involve Rogan, it may involve residuals, it may involve everything else. And that was his message. His message in his trainings over in Georgia the last 2 years is like, if you don't do this, this, and this, you're going to jail, and then you're going to hell. So it was one of those kind of messages. Alan York was very similar in his presentation last year. We were kind of like, listen, you need to do this. My message last year was, if I could tell you, if you chose the right nozzle, you had the right gallonage, you had the right equipment, you did all this right, you drove this speed, and you did all that. If I told you that, and you did that correctly, as best as you could in your selection process, and you were able to get better weed control, and get better insect control, and get better fungicide, better disease control, and you got higher yields because of that, would you do it? And everybody in the audience was kind of, yeah, because we have the technologies and we have those kind of things, but we're also trying to get over larger acres, and we have the equipment to do it and those kind of things. But just because we have all that doesn't mean we should do it. We need to do it. And everybody, most folks were pretty on board with that in making that. And I said, so if you do these things and it stays on target better, let's just recalibrate. Let's use this as an opportunity to recalibrate the way we do things and just be a little bit more accurate in the way we do stuff. And that was kind of my message. And now, because of what has happened, 2 years ago we didn't have the products. Last year we had the products, and depending on where you were, different things happened, and that's where we are. But ultimately, we put this statement at the bottom: if an applicator is unwilling or unable to follow the application requirements specified on the label, do not apply dicamba. Because so that's, and there will be other slides that say that and go from there. In a couple talks I've had this year, I've had guys tell me, and we go through this thing, and this was just last week at the Farm Bureau meeting, and he said, well, you're not telling me anything I don't already know. So, why you're scaring? And I said, well, this is what it is. And I said, and he just wanted to know when he could use the older formulations and when he had to use the newer formulations. And sometimes it becomes as simple as that, having that conversation. The critical pieces of the parameters that we have to use, that we are going to
reinforce and go by, and that we've kind of changed, and we also have a new way of doing labels, right? So this becomes we have living, breathing labels now that are actually moving as far as tank mix partners and I mean, including herbicides and adjuvants and anything like that, nutritionals. We have to be wary of that, and each of us have a website to go to, and 7 days prior to our application, just make sure that you can still do it. And make those applications. Or if you're just trying to put a tank mix partner in the tank, you need to check to make sure that that's viable. So first and foremost, nozzles and boom height. I mean, we're talking about the off target or on target, keeping it on target and not to go negative on the off target, but making the choices that we need. Wind speed, direction, buffers, tank mix partners. We talked about that a little bit. Avoid temperature inversions. That's something we're going to address, because that's something that's it's hard to get your mind wrapped around it. I know I am. I know I have. But I think we're learning a lot. Spray system hygiene. That effectively means contamination, whether that's at the tank or it's upstream somewhere. Because I think what we learned last year, if we learned anything else, is that non-dicamba tolerant soybeans are very, very sensitive, and they might be more sensitive than anything else out there. I mean, at the end of the day, as far as symptomology, as far as exhibiting symptoms, we don't need a lot in order for that to happen. We kind of knew that. Let's talk about nozzle selection. A lot of folks believe that this is probably the most critical factor, because we're talking about droplet size. The size of the droplets, the larger the droplet, the less movement off target you will have. Again, you have a lot of other parameters, wind speed, speed and height of the boom and all that you have to factor in, because all that is impacted. But the driftable fines are the biggest culprit as far as off-target movement, and I think everybody believes that, and everybody kind of knows it, and everybody realizes if it's windy and you've got a lot of fine droplets, we see it. I mean, we know that that's drift. I mean, as a whole. So with that being said, just to show you, don't get too caught up in this, but here's your driftable fines right in here. Okay, here is 35% driftable fines with an XR nozzle. We use we're looking at the TGS here, but this is just for comparison. Obviously, we have a lot of different nozzles that we can use that are, again, on our website that you can go to. But we have the TTI here giving us the ultra coarse nozzle, droplet size. We've got the AIXR, we've got the extended range flat fan. So 35% driftable fine, all things created equal. Then you've got 7% here in that little area, and then you got less than 1% with the TTI under the same parameters that you're evaluating. And in this situation, so the critical piece there is you need a large droplet size, a larger, heavier droplet that doesn't leave under all the same conditions. If you choose the if you have incorrect droplet sizes, depending on what piece of literature you want to look at, it can be as much as 66 times. You can increase drift by as much as 66 times more than in choosing the wrong droplet size. You could probably take it 100 times. Depending on where you are. But the fact is that a lot of times we can see the driftable fines. We get to that point, we know there's a lot of opportunities. Couple that with the wind speed that you have, and you're working on that from that standpoint. 24-inch boom height. So we've chose our droplet, and we've chose our nozzle correctly to get the ultra coarse droplet size, and then 24-inch is the maximum boom height. Okay, so we go back to weed size 101. We know with a 110-degree tip, you can get your 30 to 50% overlap at 10 to 12 inches. So we're giving you about another foot, right? So 24 inches, it's like talking about weeds. 24 inches isn't here. Yeah, I put them at 24 inches, right? My 4-inch, this is not my 4-inch weeds, right? So it's those kind of things that we really. At the end of the day, this becomes the most unnatural act that there is in production agriculture, right? Is a 24-inch boom height, trying to get with a 120-foot boom, trying to get over the hills and dales of West Tennessee, and trying to do that. So that becomes, and we have auto regulation now, we have a lot of different things to help us with it, but at the same time, it does become very hard to do. So that becomes a critical piece, because if you see this and you see this, now we've done the test in the field where we've been out there with just 4 nozzle booms, and we'll have 5 of us out here 300 foot apart, and we say go, and we all have different nozzles, we all have different spray heights, and we take that same TTI 11004 nozzle and we spray it at 50 psi for 10 seconds, and we watch, and we have wind at our back up to 10 miles an hour, but it's going to be consistent because we all go at the same time. And we've had the 24 inch versus the 48 inch, and we've seen that stuff go 30 foot with the 24 inch and 300 foot with the 48 inch. So height makes a big difference. In this situation, it's at 5.6 times more. Wind speed. This is where we changed a little bit from last year, especially. I mean, those other 2 things were same old. We didn't change in our labeling, but here we did, especially Engenia, because Engenia we had 0 to 3, as long as you didn't spray in an inversion, whatever that is, right? And then you could also go up to 15 if you weren't going towards a sensitive crop. And so we had that flexibility where we had. Now, so what we've done is we've dropped that back. No spraying if it's under 3 miles an hour. 3 to 10 miles an hour is where it's going to be the critical piece. Now, if it's blowing at all towards a sensitive crop, and that includes non-dicamba tolerant soybeans and cotton. Last year in Engenia, you were able to continue to spray. You just had to have a buffer there. You can't do that now. XtendiMax, you couldn't do that last year. So anyway, so for us, it's more consistent with what XtendiMax was last year, and that's where we are. So if you got the neighboring sensitive crops, you got to be aware that if it's blowing downwind, you cannot spray it. Now, greater than 10 miles an hour, we can't spray. And that includes wind gusts, right? So we have to be aware. We have to be aware of that. We need to be making that. We need to be evaluating the wind speed at the boom height, okay, at the nozzle. So yes, sir.
Who's going to evaluate that? I'm from Tennessee. Tennessee has let it be known that they're going to have more people in the field checking applicators. Applicators have to be trained, but so who's going to determine? I mean, is my spray guy, I mean, we've got custom applicators, he got to be out, if you're talking about Gus, every time he fills up his tank, is he got to go back there and check the wind speed to make sure we're legal?
Yeah, we hope. Well, as part of the reporting, you've got to report what the wind is at the field, right? So that's got to be taken. Now, what we want.
It takes you 3 hours to spray. Do you check it when you first get there, and then you start spraying, and then the state guy pulls up as you finish, and he checks it. It was 9 when you started. He pulls up now, it's 11. He says, you're viable. I mean, have you been told this? Who's
right?
Who's determining this stuff for legality?
Yeah, Todd, I think that's one of those things. I mean, it's going to have to be fair. I mean, hopefully we're making reasonable decisions along those lines. I mean, obviously the TDA inspectors are going to be out. You know, the white trucks. You know, that's been suggested. I mean, that's one of those things. But at the end of the day, I mean, those are going to be things that I can't tell you. I mean, my answer is I can't tell you that. What they're trying to do, and on the Tennessee on the Tennessee training, what it does, they've got a meter at the boom height and look at it. I mean, if it's good, go. You do it for 2 minutes at the boom height, and if it's within that range, you can go. And then it suggests to check periodically through the time that you're spraying that field. John, you have anything to add?
Well, in Arkansas, I was asking Perry, I think we've got a statute in our spray rules that we're supposed to check the wind at the beginning of application and the end of application.
Okay.
I don't know if Tennessee has that or not, but maybe something to ask.
Yeah. I don't think that's part of it, but it's not all done yet either, so it's close.
If we even have it.
Well, are they going, I mean, those are questions, I'm sure you've been in on me, are they going to cover this in the mandatory training? Because they're telling us, you got to train every spray rig operator, anybody. So are they going to cover how they want this done in those meetings, or is it going to be left up to us to interpret the label, which is?
I think there's going to be some amount of honest interpretation, but at the same time, I mean, that's a question to be asked in those trainings, right? So, too, when we're asking, but.
That's a question to the Tennessee Department of Ag.
Yeah.
They don't want to answer.
My suggestion is if you go to the tank and have to fill up, I would test the wind then and I'd record. Because recording is going to be very important. And so, yeah, if he shows up and it's 11 miles an hour, you pull out your record sheet, says I've checked this 3 times and it's been 6 and 8. That's the only thing I know.
Well, is there a test for inversions?
No, there's an app you can get on the phone that supposedly tells you, but no, they can't even define, can they? They can't even define what an inversion is right now.
There's certain meteorological, pieces that have to be factored into determining an inversion, and they can do that.
Arkansas, but in Tennessee, I don't want a spray rig driver trying to have to determine if there's an inversion out there or not. He's doing good to determine how much chemical for in the tank. So he's in the right field.
I mean, these are great questions because these are the questions that at the end of the day, we're trying to get a little bit more strict on this. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, we got to take this, to heart. Is the reason why we're doing this is because of the things that have happened the last couple of years. And then ultimately, number one, first and foremost, it's got to be the new formulations. It's got to be the approved labeled formulations, especially for in-crop use. It has got to be that. And in-crop use means 14 days prior to, all the way through the over-the-top applications. And that stands for everything. And then we got to start there, and then ultimately, hopefully, some of this will take care of itself. But everybody's got to do their due diligence and try and make the applications in a meaningful way. And some days that's going to be I can't spray, and unfortunately that's going to be the decision, because we really do, in all honesty, as optimistic as I am, as Greg Stapleton is, we really do just have 1 year. And then I don't know what we do from there, because now we've got the technology in the seed and we've had it there for 3 years. I mean, this will be the 4th, so we've got to play with that. Doubling the wind speed, 10 to 20 miles for this instance. You can increase that potential again, depending on what you're evaluating, but when you're putting them all together. Okay, so this is one that we're really focused on as far as the sensitive areas and crops, and know your surroundings. And that's probably the one thing that's more critical. We really need to, this should probably be number one. Visit with the neighbors, cropping plans and everything, probably more so than ever done before. Just being aware. I mean, the technology thing is something that's actually really good, because that's kind of the last effort. Arkansas was very good about starting that program going. Again, there's nobody taking that on as far as, or if there's anybody taking that on as far as locally providing the flags and things like that. That's the only place it would be right now. But more and more states are really trying to adopt it and promote it as being a last effort to say, okay, this field is this. But ultimately, it's being aware of your surroundings and surveying those. Now we have you consult the sensitive crop registries for location of specialty crops and other sensitive sites. Record the areas of potential buffer zones around the edges, and document your efforts to identify the sensitive crops. Now, as far as the non-sensitive areas, as we talk about buffers, the way buffers work this year, you're really talking about the threatened and endangered species, because if you've got a sensitive crop downwind, you can't spray it, no matter what the wind is. And then and then if it's not a sensitive crop or area, then you can spray as long as you're within 3 to 10 miles an hour. So ultimately, these can be used. These can be used in a buffer situation. You know, you just have to have 110 foot of it. I mean, if you've got the woodlands and you've got the bodies of water and you've got those kind of things, and I'll define that a little bit better. But understand that fields that planted to dicamba tolerant soybeans and cotton, agricultural fields that have been prepared for planting. You've got these crops that are not sensitive, roads, paved or graveled surfaces, and areas covered by the footprint of a building, shade house, silo, those kind of things are considered not. Now, if you look at the buffer zones and when not to spray, you're really looking at this part here. I was in a talk the other day and they talked about you have to have a 110-foot buffer, and the non-sensitive crops can be that buffer. So if you just say, I have to have a 110-foot buffer regardless, then you're okay, because you can spray right up to a cornfield. And we'll show that in a little bit. But really, native vegetation, woodland, bodies of water, road ditches, these are non-crop areas potentially harboring threatened or endangered species. Potentially. So every one of those is potentially harboring those. You know, we don't really define those. We don't go looking for them. And they require a 110-foot buffer. Okay? There's the sensitive crops, and this is not all inclusive, but we cannot spray when they're downwind, just to reinforce that. Just to kind of show this by a diagram, we've got a north wind, 3 to 10 miles an hour. Here's corn here. Okay, so here's a woodland here, right? Here's corn here. You got non-dicamba tolerant soybeans, dicamba tolerant soybeans, the wind's going this way, you're within the wind range, right? So everything else you've taken care of. And so this is a place where you don't need a buffer and you can spray, right? Because that's not a sensitive crop. Look at this way now, you've got northwest wind, and this way you need a buffer here because that's a woodland. So potentially could be you know, you could potentially have threatened or endangered species there. Okay, obviously there's corn here, but there's corn here. So you can spray this because it's away from the non-dicamba tolerant soybean. You do not have to have buffer there. You know, that becomes, let's think. Let's take another thought, because, you know, would that be beneficial to put one swath width, you know, away from there. But that's okay to be. Obviously you can't spray here. That's blowing towards the non-dicamba tolerant beans. But now let's switch this corn to non-dicamba tolerant beans. Now you've got this west wind blowing that way, straight, and you're going to put your 110-foot buffer there because of the tree line. And the question isn't, can you spray? It's, should you spray? I mean, that's just something to think about, because when you've done that, you know, and that begs the other question is that.
It depends on how good of a logger your neighbor's got. Fields of liberty lean beans.
Well, but now this year begs the question, as far as the Engenia label goes, is that was a question that we got. So I mean, I got this in the fall. So if this is non-dicamba tolerant soybeans and this is non-dicamba tolerant soybeans, can I spray that field with Engenia XtendiMax or Fexapan? No. Because I can't spray 0 to 3 miles an hour. And if it's 3 to 10 miles an hour, it's going to be blowing towards a non-dicamba tolerant soybean. So that's knowing where you are. So, I mean, it's those kind of things that just makes you go, you know. All right, tank mixtures. All of us have websites. I have the EngeniaTankMix.com. You've got the XtendiMax application requirements.com. You can go to DuPont and surf through that to get to the Fexapan. And we have this ongoing. These are living, breathing labels. This is unique to anything we've ever had before. Of course, they were in place last year, and that's where you have to go for your tank mix partners, for herbicide tank mix partners, or any pesticide that might be on that, or you're wanting to look at. These are changing daily. Adjuvants, nutritionals. At the end of the day, AMS and UAN is a tank mix partner. You know, we've kind of separated that because we've been telling everybody for 3 years, woo, Lord mercy, the only thing, I mean, absolutely do not put AMS in that tank, you know, and because you'll break the bonds and all of a sudden it'll become an acid and it'll go back to being as volatile as base chemistry, as the tech material. And I think we've shown that. Now the thing is for years, what have we been doing? I mean, AMS has been a critical part of all dicamba applications we've ever done. If it's Midwest, I mean, it's AMS goes in the tank. When we put Roundup with it, AMS goes in the tank, you know, to condition the water. So, and that does it for all formulations. It breaks those bonds regardless. So that's been around, but that is actually that is actually something we mandated from the get-go. Do not put AMS or UAN in the tanks because of what that does, but that is actually a tank mix partner at the end of the day if you made it. No acidifying water conditioners. So this is different from last year because what we've also found is that anything that creates an acid formula, takes that pH down, can break the bonds, the salt bonds in all those concentrations. So acidifying agents we really have to be wary of. We do not want to take that pH down. Roundup will do that. Glyphosate will do that alone fairly significantly. So we do need to realize that we can't have that, and that is new on the label. Again, going to those now. This brings this to the point, right? So some tank mixes can do that. There's a reason why we don't have some tank mixes because of the acid and doing all that. But this is here's your dicamba loss. So say this is volatility, right? And yes, I said the V word. And so here we go, right here. Here's the temperature going up here from 72 to 100. Here's the Engenia Solo. This is duration over 24 hours, airflow, and just we had it on a glass form, so heated it up. And as we heated it up, the Engenia with AMS. Here's how your dicamba loss occurred, and then across that same time frame, there's where Engenia. And this is some of the baseline data that we did. That's why when we initially started training, no AMS, no AMS, no AMS. I mean, we cannot do that, and that became part of the label originally. But any of the work that we were doing, but AMS increases the potential volatility by 20 times. If you wanted to put dimethylamine, which is Banville, it'd probably sitting somewhere about here. So I mean, we're seeing that kind of increase. If it's diglycolamine like Clarity, it's probably sitting somewhere in here as we start increasing the rate, and that's where we are as far as that goes. So that gives an understanding of where these formulations are. Proved dicamba formulations. This is just additional labeled application requirements without going over those in depth too much because I'm not going to really I'm not getting into performance today. I mean, that kind of told on itself last year. Early, we had some cool temperatures, we had some unseasonably warm conditions, we got pigweed out of the ground early. All of a sudden everybody's like, whoa, it doesn't look like we're getting the performance, and maybe people adjusted and tried to do anything. But once it warmed up, once we started getting the weather that we had, arguably we had some of the cleanest soybean and cotton fields that we've had in a long time, and it just worked, and it actually worked too good because I think people will stretch it. Targeting 4-inch weeds, but we saw a lot of bigger weeds going down, especially later in the season. But we can go to soybeans, pre-plant through R1 growth stage up to, and then cotton we can actually go 7 days prior to harvest. Now again, we're going to have to watch what the states are doing as far as when we're making the application, because some of these are going to be adjusted as far as that goes. But as far as the growth stage is concerned, as long as you're within that range, you can do it. And so let's see, minimum application volume. It's 10 gallons. Somehow this got passed as far as the uniformity. XtendiMax and Fexapan, the minimum is 15 GPA. We're 10. I almost took that out of there because I want to be 15. I don't think we need to deviate. We're going large droplet sizes. If we proved anything last year early when conditions weren't perfect, is maybe we weren't getting the coverage that we need. John, you agree? And so that was really the only hiccup that we had, but that was because early in the application that we had going on, and that's when it changed. And so the recommendation is really in 15, and I wish they had made that. But that's just something that we didn't have anything to do with. Sprayer speed less than or equal to 15 miles an hour. Just kind of slow down. The recommendation on the label actually says if you're hitting corners and turns, you want to take that thing down even slower just to make sure you get the cover. Don't know if the people that wrote those kind of suggestions knew what the limitations we had, but ultimately we can make some adjustments and slow down hitting corners and making sure we're getting the coverage. Okay, the rainfall and irrigation interval. This was something that was different last year. This is a rain-free interval. This isn't a rain-fast deal. Rain fastness on these things are 4 hours, and that's standard. That's standard for how dicambas have been for years, and that's where we've always been with these formulations, and even going forward with the newer formulations. However, the 24 hours, that is just a regulatory thing, just based on what's been evaluated. This has to do with runoff. And Extendamax and Fexapan had this on their label last year. That was just a misnomer. Ours should have said the same thing as far as runoff is concerned, because if you get runoff within 24 hours, you can have off-target movement. However, the interesting thing is, I don't know I don't know why that makes a difference. I think that's just the evaluation in the regulatory environment and in the lab and whatever they did to do this, and that's what we've been using. But ultimately, I don't know that it matters it's 4 hours or it's 24 hours as far as runoff goes. Because if we get a flood and rain in 24 hours, it's going to run off probably just as much as it did in 4.
So if it rains within 24 hours, if you apply,
that is an off-label. That is an off-label application, and that's what Extendamax was and Fexapan was last year. So that's another one of those. That's a hard thing to kind of
in the summertime in the mid-south, it can blow up a rain cloud just about like that.
Right? In the south, if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. Right? Ultimately that becomes that. But especially as far as pop-up rainstorms and stuff, you can't predict. We're only as good as only the weather conditions. Okay. Do not apply aerially. We haven't been able to do that ever. Avoid temperature inversions. Okay, so this is one of those things that the first time I ever heard about temperature inversions was in 1996. And what happened? Roundup Ready system came into place. Glyphosate changed on a dime. They had to change they changed the label to support the use in crops in Roundup Ready crops, especially soybeans then. And there was a change in the label that spray between 3 and 10 miles an hour and to avoid air inversions. Okay, and then it went through what is an air inversion, right? So ultimately, the biggest part of this is we're trying to control that off-target movement during air inversions. Nighttime is a high propensity for having inversions. I think that happens a lot. And it's consistent, and Kevin Bradley's data from the University of Missouri said 24 out of 30 days had an air inversion in 2016, and even more than that in 2017, and so we need to be aware. But ultimately, nighttime spraying just kind of lends itself to that. Now, so with that, they made the adjustment between sunrise and sunset. You can only make the applications. Some states are tightening that up a little more, and it's going to be 7:30 to 5:30. So again, be aware of the state limitations. The air inversions at the field level are characterized by increasing temperatures with altitude. Really, you got the cooler air, warmer air, and that's ultimately what's going on. And when you have that, you have the opportunity, especially for smaller droplet sizes getting caught up in that inversion. Now, an air inversion, if you stay with me with it, an air inversion, just because it's 3 to 10 miles an hour doesn't mean you can't have an air inversion, but it's highly unlikely because that breaks up the inversion. So now let's do this. Stay with me on this one, because if you have an air inversion, it can get the fine droplet sizes can get caught up in it. And so if you've got 35% compared to less than 1%, you've got this, right? So then an air inversion can last for 8 hours sometimes. So if it goes half a mile an hour after you make the application, you have an inversion going on, those driftable fines get caught up in there, and now the wind starts blowing, because you got to have the wind blow. If the wind doesn't blow, it goes up and comes down, right? So all this off-target movement involves wind eventually. But ultimately, all these driftable fines caught up in that inversion right about here, about crop height, and now all of a sudden I get a half a mile an hour wind for about 8 hours. How far is that? 4 miles? And what am I doing? That concentration is just swiping the top of the sensitive crops that you got. So ultimately, that becomes the idea of an air inversion. Now that's why we have to have more understanding, because if that happens, that can be why we have some consistent across the board applications that look very uniform. So this just shows that this is a labeled application. This is actually with the TTI nozzles. TTI nozzle over here. Everything's the same except this is sprayed at 1 p.m. Approximately 9 miles an hour. Okay, so there's some movement we got right here, and that's 1/10,000th. So that shows a symptom, but it is not. But that right there is, I see it, but it's really 1/10,000th. You're just not going to see anything. You see it though, and it's just okay. But see how far that moved? Hardly any. Now, what you got here with the inversion, this is sprayed at 9 p.m. All right, less than 3 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden the wind going through here, and this is the movement you have with the wind. Now the red is 1/100. That's going to be a yield. That's going to be a yield response at any stage, right? 1/1000th, you're getting out of that, but you do see a response, and then you got 1/10,000th right here. But you can see the movement across that. So you get a lot of movement there. And so ultimately, we're looking at the air inversion, and we need to understand it a little bit better, and we need to get away from it. So last thing is spray hygiene. Okay, this is a term that came up. This is my counterpart in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Wisconsin, who was an extension weed specialist, Vince Davis. He started looking at this because the uniformity of the symptomology that we were getting was across the board. And sometimes, I mean, you'd be sitting out there in the middle of nowhere, and it's just like, well, where'd this come from? And it's so complete and uniform. Contamination, and people will say, listen, I came from this field and I've filled up 4 times. And then that's when we walk away from contamination. We've done it for years, right? Well, it can't be contamination. I mean, we know the boom contamination goes out, plays itself out and everything like that. But we're seeing a lot of this. So he said now they've changed this. Now everything's the same as far as tank cleanup. We got to clean the tank out. Got to be complete. And that's what we've got to have, right? We've got to clean that out. And so once we do that, we do a triple rinse. We do the 1, we did the 2 with the detergent, and then we do a 3rd one. And we make sure we pull our end caps off, and we do the nozzles, and we do all those kind of things. We also clean the outside of the tank. Now, this isn't anything new. Now they've mandated on the label, and you also have to have, you also need to make sure it's clean prior to. Because if you have any amount of AMS in that tank, you have ruined the integrity of that product as far as breaking those bonds and making it more volatile. So if you came from a Flexstar field with AMS and you got 50 gallons left in there, and then all of a sudden, well, I came from a soybean field, so I'm just going to fill up in there. And we're trying to prevent any of those kind of things from happening. So be aware of that. So the clean out. 3 milliliters of formulated product. That's a syringe right there, 3 ml. And a 1,000-gallon tank is enough to show soybean response on symptomology on soybeans. Okay, I mean that's all you need. I mean it's not going to be a yield thing, but you can see the symptomology. That's if you mix that in a soda can. Then that would be the concentration gradient. Okay, so that's what you got. And so now we put that in a 1,000-gallon tank. Now, if we did this, okay, right here. Here's one side of the field, here's the other side of the field. Okay? Which looks like it's hurt worse to you? Right side, right? Okay, so what you got there, that's 1/1006. That's in the top trifoliates.
what you've done here in the 1/100th, which will mean a significant yield response, regardless of the stage you spray it in, is you've knocked the terminal out of that thing. And what has happened is those leaves have come up around it in about 16 days, and that's the response. So ultimately, that's getting an understanding of what the symptomology looks like, but that's what I said the first time I saw it, right? I even put one of these tests out and thought I sprayed it wrong, right? So everybody showed the same thing. Here's our sample handling mixing model. This is going straight into the tank. Where can contamination come from in there? It can only come from the tank, from the sprayer you're using, right? Now let's take it one step further. Here's the upstream mixing, okay? We're going hoses and pumps at the shed, in the field, storage tanks, hot loads that we make in nurse tanks that we can do, mixing and loading, especially unlined EPDM hoses, nurse trucks and everything like that. What we found is one of these hoses was a supply hose, especially one that was on the ground, and they never cleaned that out. And so everything came through there. And every load that they mixed, you got 3 milliliters of dicamba in there, maybe? I mean, is that possible? Because this became some hard discussions and some things that my counterpart up in Wisconsin did, and saying, could that be? As far as contaminant, think about it, 3 milliliters per thousand. Okay, so anyway, just finish up here. Federal label. It's a restricted use pesticide now. Okay, so you got to follow all the guidelines associated with that. The record keeping thing, records must be generated as soon as practical, but no later than 14 days. Some states are putting a limitation on that. Records must be retained for 2 years. Some states are making that a little higher. These are the things that we're going to have to take records of. Okay, and I'm not going to go over all that, but there's 20 things there, and that's essentially all the stuff we're talking about. And then in summary, consult this website. That's where you need approved nozzles are there, tank mixes. Slow down, there's the speed, no more than 15 miles an hour, 24-inch. Clean the spray system before and after. And know your surroundings, 110-foot buffer. Do not spray if the wind is blowing towards sensitive crops. Avoid temperature inversions. And hey, at the end of the day, plan for our early post. This is weed control. The reason why we're here, and the reason why we have this technology, and the reason why we've gone there, the last time we had a new class of chemistry for herbicides was 1983, the HPPD inhibitors. So we've got to use the old stuff. We use it through seed technology, and that's where we end up. So spray when the weed. So at the end of the day, overlap residuals, multiple effective sites of action. Notice I said effective, and that's really where we need to be. So, any questions? I think that's my time, but I appreciate your time and attention. Huh?
CCA sheet.
Oh, I'm sorry. CCA sheet. I know they gave me that. Anybody that needs it, I can get it. I need it. Anybody have any quick questions, thoughts, comments? I appreciate your time and attention. I knew that was a lot of information pretty quick. So.
Are they looking at changing the formulation in it to try to make it less volatile?
Well, ultimately, we feel like we've gotten there, right? So we're always looking to advance all, the formulations that we have, whether it's for mixing or anything else. So hopefully we can get a better handle on everything that was happening, hopefully, but we're always trying to advance our chemistries. That's a good question.